Welcome to another DragonLance Saga review episode. It is Kirinor Fleur Green the 25th. My name is Adam, and today I'm talking about, or I'm giving you the review of, XDM X-treme Dungeon Mastery 2nd Edition. Now, it is currently at the printers, so you can't pick up a hard copy. I believe pre-orders are still out there, or available, I should say, if you want to pick up a hard copy. I put the link in the description below there. Again, this is just my perspective. As with any of these reviews that I put out there, I'm going to try to be as open and honest as possible. But again, everything is filtered through my perspective, as what else could it be, right? And so I may have different views, or my reviews may be wildly different from yours. Well, I welcome that. So you're welcome to throw up your ideas in the YouTube chat or in the comments if you're not watching this live. And let's have a bit of a back and forth. I don't suspect this review is going to be dramatically long, maybe 10, 20 minutes or something like that, because I'm not going to tell you everything that's in this book. I'll go over some of the story beats that, what this book is about and give you my impressions. But ultimately, I do think that you should pick up this book. Now, it is a role-playing game, I would say source book, except there's only 2 chapters about actual game mechanics, and they are very thin. And that's really what XDM is known for. So we'll get into that in just a second. Rise, thanks for joining live. Solid Crumbie, how you doing? I am doing quite well. Okay. So I became aware of XDM from the Dungeon Craft YouTube channel. This was in the 1st edition. And what happened, which I think was surprising for everyone involved, was that it was released in 1st edition and it sold out. And now people are trying to sell not only bogus copies of it on eBay or secondary markets, but also actual used copies of the original edition for exorbitant prices, like $200 and up from there. So Tracy Hickman decided to, approach some of the other editors and creators and say, well, why don't we do a 2nd edition? And it turns out everyone wanted to. They had something to say in the 2nd edition. They had some revisions that they wanted to make. And so they did. They started a Kickstarter last year. I supported the Kickstarter based on Dungeon Craft's review. And ultimately, it took a very long time for it to come out. Again, the actual edition is at the printer right now. So they're doing print runs of the hardcover edition. They're still working on the official digital versions, but they're going to have multiple versions of the digital edition available. And really, this is it's an interesting book that I think leans a little bit too far into cheese. So much so that it actually makes me not want to read parts of it. Or to be fair, it made it so I was tired reading parts of it because I was tired of all the cheese. Imagine, hey, Chris, thanks for joining live, by the way. Good to see you, man. Imagine Fizban in his most bumbling and sort of punny and jokey manner, and times that by 100, and that's what this book is presented in. It's really frustrating for someone who just wants to get to the meat of what is great about this book. But for those who really, really dig this type of humor, you're really, really going to love this book. Okay, so again, there's just far too much cheese in this. It's painful. They have footnotes, but the footnotes don't actually add context to what they're talking about. They used footnotes as joke platforms, which is very weird. It's a very weird way to use footnotes. And I get it if you're trying to, break that 4th wall, which is really how this entire book is written. It's all breaking the 4th wall. If you're trying to do that, well, then congratulations, you were very successful. How you doing, Timothy? And I am definitely ready for that. But if you're just coming into this to sort of learn tips, techniques, and be presented with ideas that are maybe new or foreign to you as a player and a dungeon master, you have to filter. You have to wade through a lot of stuff. And the thing is this book is actually really valuable. It presents a lot of really great information and great techniques. Again, you just have to wade through a lot of cheese. Okay, so that being said, it provides a lot of modern sensibilities when approaching role-playing. You know, we've gone through a lot of movements as of late in the gaming world, and a lot of social movements that, you know, old school gamers or old school personalities, I should say, may be begrudging the direction of a society or the dominant culture. But this book addresses it. And I think it does it in a way that is not offensive at all. You know, why would it be offensive? But also for those of us who are older gamers who may not really fully understand why some of the cultural shifts have been made, or maybe we think they've shifted a little too far, this book actually presents those perspectives in a really adult and direct way. And so there's no hand-holding. It's just straight information presented logically, and it gave me a little bit of context about the current social structure of gaming that I was not aware of. And I think it's really important to be open to at least hear others' perspectives. Whether or not you're going to ultimately agree with them is a different thing, but hear them so you understand where people are coming from. And this book really gave me a little bit of perspective. Now, again, it doesn't lean heavy into it. So if you just don't want to hear any of that, well, then you're really not going to hear much of it. But it is there. And I think it's important that it is. It also talks about accessibility a little bit in the book proper, but then also expounds on the idea of accessibility in the appendix. And I think this is a really important aspect for people who are coming into gaming. If you've been gaming, this is nothing new, this part of the book, because you've been doing this the whole time. You know, when people talk about being a dungeon master or running a Dungeons and Dragons game, or any role-playing game for that matter, or being a player in a game, and they bring up ideas about accessibility or players' feelings or modern sensibilities, they're doing it through hyperbolic methods. And it's always this situation where you don't know anyone in the game table and you just come up with some idea and it offends everyone because you're this old school gamer and they're all new school gamers. That world doesn't really exist. And I may be insulated, so maybe it does, but in every experience I've ever had, you meet the other players and the dungeon master before you start the actual game, you know? And so you have conversations, you understand where they're coming from and their perspectives. So some of this accessibility stuff, you know, for example, if you are wheelchair bound and you need extra room at the table, that's a no shit situation. Like, I don't know anyone that would go out of their way to box in a player for their accessibility situation, you know, and prevent them from being able to get away from the table or to go and grab a snack. Or, I mean, some of this is kind of nonsensical. You know, we need to make sure that everyone understands that everyone is heard type stuff. I've just never had a game session where people are downright mean and aggressive to other players in that way. So for it to be called out as a specific appendix and in the text a little bit throughout this book, I was a little stunned. Like, are they doing that because this is an actual problem? Or are they addressing it because it's a fake problem that they want a virtue signal a excuse to present? It could be a little of column A and column B, but in either case, it struck me as odd. There's a couple things that struck me as odd in this as well. This entire book is about a philosophy of role-playing. It's about stripping down mechanics and presenting story first, and understanding that as the Dungeon Master, or the X-treme Dungeon Master in this particular case, everything is in service to the player's experience. I've always played that way, but I appreciate that it's being called out in that perspective. And there's a lot of, again, really great tricks and techniques presented that help you as a dungeon master or extreme dungeon master really lead with your foot forward on that angle. But I've been playing like that since Saga role-playing systems, since Vampire the Masquerade and World of Darkness was released, you know? That's just story first is how I've always done it. And I always saw the Dungeon Master as presenting the mechanics and the story to the players and allowing them to contribute and shift the story. Apparently, that's not what everyone does. And so books like this are really, really valuable for those who really just think gaming is about defeating the DM, you know, as if it was a enemy versus player. All right, so do I have more fun as a player or as a DM? Honestly, I have more fun as a Dungeon Master. I enjoy playing, but because there's such a variety of play styles, I want to, if I'm going to spend my time in hours of engagement, I want to make sure I'm getting the most out of it. And I like playing, but I really enjoy dungeon mastering. So I would rather have the sort of backer story presentation angle than the, you know, arguing with other players over game mechanics angle. That sucks. I don't enjoy that at all. Wolf, thanks for joining live, by the way. It's good to see you. You love the D&D cartoon and wish it was on iTunes. I do too. You read the Vox Machina crit roll. You need to read Vox Machina crit roll. Yeah, I'm not really following any of that. I watched the cartoon and that was dope. That was really great on Amazon Prime. I really enjoyed that. But okay, so that being said, the techniques that they present, again, are very logical, and they're techniques that have existed as long as I've been aware of dungeon mastering. Not everyone uses them, and I won't use every technique presented, but because it is very much scene and setting based. So, you know, one of the really wonderful techniques in this is to write out a sort of outline of how you as the dungeon master plan to spend the time during the game session. Now, of course, this is malleable. You know, it can shift and everything. But in general, through your experience with a particular gaming group, you know how much time it's going to take to set up, to get the party, you know, sort of focused, how long it's going to take to role play a specific scene, how long it's going to take to run through a combat encounter, you know, depending difficulty and actions. And then you sort of break those little pieces up into what an entire game session might look like. They set up suggestions on flowcharts. With multiple branches and options depending on what the players do. I'm a much more hands-off dungeon master where if I'm going to set up a storyline, if the players follow it, awesome. If they don't, well, I'm going to come up with some stuff on the fly because there are an infinite amount of tools in order to create on-the-fly encounters. I don't mind opening a monster manual and saying, give me just a second, players. You just ran across a random encounter and I need to look this up real quick. And spending 2 minutes reading a description. You know, I don't mind doing stuff like that. It's not as fluid. It's not as enjoyable of a game because it's not so much story driven anymore. Now it's just encounter driven. But if that's what the players are wanting in that particular moment, it's my job as the dungeon master to serve that. And so I will. So, you know, this sort of flowchart technique that's presented in this, it's a little bit too structured for my particular tastes, but I do really, really like the ideas behind it. It presents some stuff in here that's just weird. Like, I like to present an atmosphere to a point. What I won't do is have a DJ sitting next to me ready to cue up sound and lighting effects. But that's what this book talks about in some chapters. And then it gets some even really weird places, talking about like card techniques, like magic, you know, like how to use a magic card trick in the game session, and then magic dice tricks and stuff. That's ridiculous to me. There is zero chance I could ever ever imagine being in the middle of a role-playing game and needing to execute a card trick. So there's an entire chapter based around tricks and how to perform them and different variations of the trick. And is this a magic book or is this a role-playing book? Because it's really weird that they spent so much time. And that was the chapter where it was a struggle to get through. This book took me a week to read because there's parts in it that I just didn't want to get through. But I did, and I'm glad I did, to know that I'll never have to revisit those chapters again. But equally, there's other chapters that I will regularly return to because I find them interesting, engaging, and have really great ideas in them. So it is a bit of a mixed bag. You got to be honest about it, right? I guess Deck of Many Things, maybe. I don't know. It's weird, man. It's just not for me. Really. And they're talking about like physical prop setups and settings, you know, to create a more live action role playing experience in your role playing game. Not interested at all in that, to be honest. If I see a dungeon master with like a hood or a hat on, I'm out. Like that's too much for me. I can't get into that. That drives me crazy. That's silly and childish and ridiculous. Like I'm not gonna be a part of that. It should be, in my worldview, just friends hanging out, having a good time, telling a good story, and immersing yourself through imagination and whatever you have for props on the table. Not like a full Renaissance fair presentation with magical tricks. Like what the? Okay, so that's included as well. Again, there are some really great, you know, let me tell you guys who is behind this, because this is a great group of people that did a wonderful job putting this book together. So first and foremost, I've always been a fan of Tracy Hickman ever since I read Dragons of Autumn Twilight, of course. And then when him and Margaret Weiss left TSR and started doing their own stuff, like the Deathgate cycle, for example, oh, it's so good. They did such a good job with stuff like that. So they are just really, really talented authors. And Laura and Tracy Hickman are amazing game designers, really groundbreaking, that have always led with the idea of story first. And I, as a particular player and DM, really, really appreciate that approach to this game. So this was written, XDM is a game system, however, and that's something that you really have to remember, because most people who buy this book will buy it for the tips, techniques, and ideas presented with role-playing a game, not necessarily XDM as a game, because that's the majority of this book. But XDM is a game system in which they devote 2 chapters to. And that's all you need, because it is such a stripped down game system that there's just no need for anything more than 2 chapters to explore and explain the entire game system. That may be too reductive for some people, but if you really do like to explore new game systems and techniques in gaming, I think it's totally worth it. I think it's great. I really, really appreciate XDM as a system. This book was written by Tracy Hickman and Curtis Hickman, his son. Additional writing is by Howard Tayler and Sandra Tayler. They also did a lot of the interior, well, all of the interior layout. Howard Tayler did all of the illustration. He did great, by the way. These illustrations in here, I'm an artist. I'm an art director as a profession. He did a really, really great job putting this book together and visually presenting some of the quirky, comedy situations. Let me show this really quick. The entire structure of this game is based around, the entire concept behind XDM is based around a single game session that Tracy Hickman had with a group that he didn't particularly enjoy. So the whole setup is they were playing a role-playing game where the Dungeon Master just happened to mention these runes that are on this pillar, and it was like 2 gaming sessions of the players trying to decode these runes, which meant nothing. It was just part of a description. And Tracy Hickman was playing a barbarian, and so he got tired of sitting around doing nothing, so he just started opening doors in the dungeon and defeating monsters, and it ended up in a total player wipe. But that's what started the whole idea process of this entire game system, which is pretty silly and ridiculous, setup for what would ultimately be a really cool game system. And so I really do want to, sort of tip the cap to the people involved in this book because it is great. Now, again, I read a preliminary PDF version. It's a preliminary digital version of the book. It is not finally printed again and released. The final digital version isn't even released. So there's entirely the random opportunity / chance of things changing, though I don't think they will. But it's possible. So who knows if it will or not. I don't necessarily think it needs to change anything because what I bought it for, based on the recommendation of the first edition through Dungeon Craft, I got in spades. It was exactly what I wanted it to be for that. The other stuff, meh. I don't care about it. Knowing that they took the time, it's going to speak to some people. And for those people that it speaks to, congratulations, you just got really lucky. But for me, it's just a little too much of nonsense and silliness. So the role-playing approach of this, of everything is for the players, is a great approach. Because ultimately, you're supposed to have fun. And if the players aren't having fun, the Dungeon Master is certainly not going to be having fun, unless the Dungeon Master is an asshole, which is entirely possible. I've been that guy before. But it's also having enough fluidity in the campaign or story that no matter where the characters go, no matter what the characters do, there's still branches and options that they can explore. And a bit of upfront preparation can help you make sure that you're not doing what I do of, rolling random encounters and trying to weave a new narrative throughout that experience of the players kind of just going and doing their own thing. I will say that doesn't happen very often for me. I mean, when I used to DM a lot, we were all there to have fun and we had a singular module that we were running through or, whatever it was. So it was very random that ever happened. But it is something to keep in mind that if you do have a pickup game, for example, or you do have particular players that like to sort of just rebel against the story, I mean, why would you have them in the group in the first place? But if they're there, you can still cater to that. And there's also a lot of information in this book about how to deal with problematic players, whether they're confrontational to you as the Dungeon Master or other players. And that's something that I have always run into in every game session I have ever had. I had one situation. Dear friend of mine, she's passed now, but dear friend of mine who we hung out and played role-playing games, Dungeons & Dragons, 2nd edition, Saga role-playing system, World of Darkness series, whether it was Vampire, Werewolf, or Mage. We just played everything together. And when 3rd edition came around, they really sort of pulled me into it. And I started doing the Key of Destiny campaign. And she just turned from someone that we have had a whole history with into a complete maniac, and just started doing everything to antagonize me as a DM. I had to stop and pull her out of the room and ask her, what the hell is going on? Why are you doing this and acting this way? And, asshole players will always fall down on the line of, well, that's what my character would do. Okay, well, then your character's a piece of shit. I'm going to kill them and you're going to roll a new one because you're not helping the story. You're not helping the other players and you're being a dick. So I am not on my game. It's really aggravating. So it's only happened once for me, but they exist. It happens from time to time. Let's see. Talking about using miniatures and setting those up is also featured in this book, which is really great. And it's a great opportunity to sort of examine those ideas through a different lens. And ultimately, people are buying this book, not because some rando person wrote it, because Tracy Hickman wrote it, who is a famous game designer and author. And his experience is what you're really buying this for. Because again, he presents these killer breakfasts which is really just a way to have these momentary interactions with individuals through the course of a sort of 2-hour plus game session, which is really just an excuse to creatively kill people. But he presents how to run a killer breakfast in this book as well, which is really interesting. It's not something I would ever want to do, but it is interesting that he presented that information and as a sort of tutorial. One thing I can't do is do a compare and contrast of the original edition versus the second edition, because I didn't read the original edition. It is now available as a PDF, as a Kindle file, I believe, because once they saw that it was, being sold for so much, they wanted to make sure other people had accessibility or access to it. Let's see, what else can we talk about this book here? It does a great job of explaining atmosphere and ambience. Again, some of it's just too much for a regular game session, in my opinion. It presents this idea of an expectation of a DM that they should be putting on a show for you rather than a gaming session. And I do see a difference between the two, whether he does or not. So let's see what else. So let's talk about the role-playing game itself, because it is a very stripped down idea. And the original role-playing game, first edition, low rolls were what you wanted. In this new version, they flipped it to high rolls. I don't know why. It may have explained it briefly, but I just, barreled through the mechanics and the methodology behind it to sort of grasp that. It presents these ideas. You know what? There's like 3 stats, and that's it. So let me see if I can find them really quick. There's TAC, which is toughness and constitution. There's Psych, which is intelligence, wisdom, and general smarts. And there's WA, which is mystical power, karma, and luck. And aside from those 3 stats, you have the regular health and levels, but levels don't mean anything. There's no progression of any kind except for what the XDM, the Dungeon Master, wants to give the players as a sort of congratulation prize, There's no mechanic there saying if you get X levels, you get an extra point in one of your ability scores or something like that. Growth is less important. And one thing that he really focuses on in this that I've never taken the approach of, but I probably will now because I like the idea of it, is the importance of character death. He doesn't phrase this in this particular way. This is how I understood it and how I internalized it. But the idea of character death is okay. It's a moment to have heroism or excitement in a game session. So, what I used to do as a dungeon master was, from time to time, I would flub rolls to prevent character death because I wanted it to continue in a particular way. I didn't do it all the time, but from time to time I did. And so, I would leave them defeated, but not dead. This book takes the approach of, no, welcome death, welcome that experience. And yes, it's going to hurt your feelings and, maybe you're going to internalize it or something. But the truth is now you have a story. Now you have a backstory for maybe another generation of character or a friend of the deceased. You have other players that were with that character who now see that person and put them on a pedestal in their memory. They had such a great experience and watched them heroically take the fall. So it's that idea of, because you're not spending so much time in building these characters, because again, it's a very stripped down game, it's easier to let them go a little bit. I think is the understanding I got from it. But in either case, I think it is important to understand and accept character death as an inevitability rather than something that never happens. And that may mean that you never have a character that's above 6th level, for random example, or it may mean that, you never get past 1st. But if you're thinking of the game in terms of levels, then you're not thinking of the game in terms of X-treme Dungeon Mastery as a game system, because the levels are arbitrary and meaningless. The experience and the story are what are incredibly important. It's just a sort of a pivot on what you're supposed to be focusing on. He does a really good job of presenting really early on in this book different styles of play, and they break it down to 3 specific types of playing characters. And of course, no one size fits all. And so you're going to have players that are a little bit of each, or, maybe of 2 of them or something. But they're fair representations of styles of play and how to cater to them and how to shape and shift them if necessary. It's really presenting these ideas of how to speak to all player types for the benefit of the group and the experience. And I really, really appreciated that. I thought it was great. So anyway, I highly recommend that if you want to learn about dungeon mastering, if you want to learn about catering to players, or if you're a player and you want to learn how to become a better player for the group, not necessarily for yourself or a particular game system, this book is going to be invaluable for you. I mean, it tells you some really great stuff that you're going to be going back to over and over again. If you want to learn how to play XDM as a role-playing system, those 2 chapters are great. I just find it really funny. There's only 2 chapters on a whole game system, which the book is supposed to be based on. It's just, I don't know. It's silly. But if you're coming in here expecting 0 jokes and cheese and, I don't know, a serious approach, you're not going to get it. I mean, it gives you serious information. It's just, it's presented in so slapsticky of a way that I can see it being a turnoff for a lot of people. So if you can wade through it, if you're okay with it, you're going to really, really dig this book. So I highly recommend it. Okay, so what are you guys saying here? As a GWOT vet, you have plenty of real life encounters. Oh, I don't know what you guys are talking about there. Okay. Let's see. You don't know XDM was the game even when you saw it on Dungeon Craft. Yeah, that's the thing. It's literally a game system. It has character sheets in the back of the book. You're supposed to use it as a game system. But I don't know anyone who does, because the information about gaming is the reason people buy it. Not for the game system. So I do think it is something where he wanted to tell the information and then give you an example of a game system that focuses on that information. And so the game system itself is really sort of maybe not, but everything else is really the core purpose of this book. In your opinion, the best DMs describe the damage based on the 2 hit and roll damage numbers. See, that's interesting, Chris, because it presents options as a dungeon master to allow the players to describe how it turns out, right? So if you're attacking a goblin and you roll a natural 20, then you as the dungeon master would lean on the player and say, all right, describe. You just made a critical hit. What happened? And let them just sort of go off on and just, have fun explaining the ins and outs of the wound or the approach or, whatever. It's just a way to engage the players in a different way and allow you a little bit of breathing time, so you don't have to constantly be explaining how everything works. Not to mention, some characters really don't like the DM telling them what their characters do or how they did it. And so this is just another way of allowing the players to maintain ownership and contribute to the story. Let's see. You wouldn't mind cosplayer outfits, but you can't handle them much LARPs, so you understand it. If the game is supposed to be a live action role-playing game, then it makes sense. If it's supposed to be a tabletop role-playing game, I don't know why anyone would dress up. It's just silly to me. And especially Dungeon Masters. I was just sort of walking through the intertubes, as it were, and I ran across a Dungeon Master that wore a huge cloak, and it's all you saw was lips and chin. I was just do people enjoy this? I know you as a weirdo think it's cool, but do your players enjoy it? Do they want to be seen with that as an example? And then, I always have to think, am I way off base because I have completely different sensibilities? And I have to admit that, probably I am way off base for a lot of people. That's okay. Not everyone, games the same way, and that is fine. Let's see. What's everyone's opinions of the original DL modules? Too much railroading or awesome? I would say, excuse me, anyone who says that those original modules are railroading has either not read them or not played them. Because if you think that the novels follow the modules exactly, you've clearly never read them. Because they offer options and differences. They intentionally change the novels in ways that it wouldn't be spoilers for the modules. So, anyone who ever plays any module, there's a little bit of railroading involved in any module because you're within the confines of that setup. So there's no difference between a Dragonlance adventure or any other adventure module. But honestly, there's so many variations that are crazy outside of regular expectations from the novels alone. Like there's examples of Huma coming back in some of them in the modules as a resolution to the entire campaign. Like there's some weird shit in there that there's some options that can happen that are way outside the bounds of what anyone ever expects if they've never actually read them. So I think railroading is an excuse for bad role playing and bad dungeon mastering, because you can really get around it if you actually care to, and again, it depends on the group. It depends on the dungeon master. If you have players who are playing Raceland as the books play him, well, then I could see that, yeah, exactly the choices they're going to make and exactly the actions they're going to take. But if you have someone that wants to take Raceland and personalize him, well, then you don't know anything about what's going to happen or how they're going to do it, Okay, so what else do you guys have here? You love to see me run a Dragonlance campaign? You will. You will. I just picked up some stuff and I just finished this. I want to run an XDM Dragonlance campaign. Well, not campaign, but maybe an adventure or two. Just to sort of, not only showcase the XDM game system, but also just have a little fun. Dragonlance in different game systems is entirely possible. So I'm definitely going to do it. Let's see. Your players and you generally take turns describing the fight. That's a strong route to take. It helps to cooperative. It helps co-op storytelling, which to you is the point. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, Court. Thanks for joining live, by the way. Yeah, 100%. Any DM who thinks that it's their job to run the game and control the outcome is a DM I will never play with. Not once ever. Because there's no fun in that. You might as well just give them your character sheet and say, well, what do I do? Because that's what they're doing. That's how they're approaching it. I had a friend who we were playing Vampire the Masquerade, and he was a brand new character. And I had this situation where he came across to a friend's house and the friend's son was brutally murdered, and the police kicked the door in because they had just got this random tip about violence from a neighbor, screams and such. And so the police come in, kick the door down to see what the hell's going on. And it's my friend's character looking down at this dead kid with blood on his hands, looking up the cops, and then he attacks the cops. I was like, what are you doing? But okay, we'll play it out. Like, if that's what you want to do, all right, you're a badass vampire. We'll see how this plays. It didn't go well for him. But like, if I was a controlling DM, I would say, you cannot do that. They will kill you or arrest you. They will detain you in some way, because he just wasn't powerful enough to overcome them. I would have told him, here's another option. How about run? Like, there, so many other ways to do this other than just fight. I hate players also that think of an encounter as an opportunity to kill. I was presented with this game session in 3rd edition where it was a homebrew world. And if you murdered someone, then because murder's illegal, which is duh, of course it is, then you were hunted by the law enforcement and you would be thrown in jail and hung. Like, so how as a Dungeons and Dragons game do you defeat monsters if you're not allowed to kill them on the streets, Like, if you're jumped by a bunch of thieves and you kill them, you're now an outlaw because you just murdered people. It doesn't matter the situations, apparently, so you have to think of creative ways of getting around situations other than just hack and slash. That is, I think, 101 player. It should be a player perspective that is so basic that it would be like a 101 college course in how to play properly. Everything is not there to murder. Like, there's going to be stuff there where that is the only outcome, but it's not every outcome, and it shouldn't be seen as the first choice. I love players that can talk their way out of a combat situation. They'll still be rewarded for defeating the encounter, but if there's a creative way to navigate an encounter other than just cutting them to pieces, I reward that. And that's, I think, the strength of 4th edition. It had a lot of flaws, as every edition does, but I really liked how they described, my mind just went blank. Encounters that were like tricks or puzzle encounters, where you would have to figure out ways to overcome a situation where combat was not an option. And you were rewarded XP for it. It just gave a lot of really great suggestions on how to do that in that edition. And it was really, for me, the first time I ever thought about that. So I just thought it was kind of cool. Let's see. You'd love to play in one of the Dragonlance games, Solid Crumby? All right, I'll keep that in mind. Ultimately, what I'll probably do is when I'm ready to do it, I'll reach out and say, look, these are the times that I can run the game. If your schedule aligns with that, hit me up, and then we'll try to get together. And I'd run a session 0 as a live stream just to sort of introduce the mechanics of the game and the character creation and the story aspect of it, and then set up the story in that. And then the next role-playing session will be the beginning of the adventure, and then maybe one more just to sort of finish it up. So they won't be like long epic campaigns, but it will be a showcase, which I think would be a lot of fun. You've all done that in games like Elder Scrolls Oblivion, where you just decide to see what happens if you attack the town cards. Yeah. Back when EverQuest first came out, I was stationed in Mannheim, Germany, and I was living off base in Weinheim. It's a beautiful town. I love Germany. But that's when EverQuest was first released. And so I was playing as this Shadow Knight is what it was called, a human Shadow Knight in the town of Freeport or something like that. And I ended up killing a guard, and then from then on, I could never return to my hometown. I had to sneak through the sewers and stuff. And what was cool about that MMO is that there was tons of little secret passages in that particular town. So, I could still get to my trainer and stuff. But yeah, real world consequences. If you kill someone, well, you can no longer go in the front entrance, which is kind of funny. All right. Anyway, that's all I wanted. I've actually been going a whole lot longer than I expected to talking about this. I think it's worth the buy. I really, really do. I think it's, around like $40 or something like that for the hardcover edition. I don't necessarily need a hardcover edition of this book. I think the PDF is great. So if you're interested in learning from a true master at gaming and game design and just writing in general, I highly recommend this book. If you like Dragonlance, this has nothing to do with that. So, if that's the only reason why you're tuning into this, sorry. Sorry. But other than that, that is it for my review of XDM, X-treme Dungeon Mastery 2nd Edition, created by Howard Tayler. What do you think of the XDM game system? Did you even know it was a system? Do you enjoy dungeon mastering advice contained within it? You can always email me at info@dlsaga.com or leave a comment below. For you guys tuning in live in the chat, I love you guys. That makes it so much more interesting for me, just to have someone to bounce ideas off of and just riff in general with. It's so much better than just talking into a can, which is what I'm doing anyway. So thank you for that. I would like to take a moment and remind those of you who are watching this after the fact or maybe haven't yet, subscribe to this channel. It helps other Dragonlance fans learn about it. I have so much content all based around Dragonlance on this channel, from games to reviews, to setting information, to music, to recipes, to just mail, and packaging. interviews and with creators, other Dragonlance enthusiasts. I mean, just there's really, when you think about the amount of content that I've been putting out so far, I need to just take a vacation for a couple months to just sort of let people absorb what they want to absorb. I mean, even stuff like the old game books, the Choose Your Own Adventure game books. I have every one of those as a playthrough. Now I've failed at most of them, but I don't blame myself. I definitely don't cry at night because of it in the dark by myself. But you can check those out too. This weekend, I'm actually going to a friend's house to play Battle System, and we're going to play through the scenario of the Red Dragon Army assaulting Quillinesty, which is in the Battle System box set. So I'm really looking forward to go doing that. So I'm going to record it all and make sure that you guys all get a visual cue of what that's like and get an understanding, because it is pretty complex. But if it's got Hickman's signature, you'll buy it. Well, Gen Com's coming up. You can just have him sign it. Have him sign you, and you can just get a tattoo of his signature if you want it so bad. You know? Get it all done all at once. All right, that's it. I got to go. You guys have a great night. Until next time, Slanjavara.